Welcome to Brutally Honest Talk Radio, where you will learn about an issue minus the BS. We don't always say what you want to hear, but what you need to hear about the issues of the day. Here's your host, Inger, along with Elmo, with his political insight and commentary.
And welcome to Brutally Honest Talk Radio. This is Inger, your host, and I have with me Elmo.
And welcome again to Brutally Honest Talk Radio. We have a guest, and her name is Jennifer Furlong. She's going to be a great addition to the mix. And I'm going to kind of let her introduce herself and give us just a minute or two of her background, especially related to just being a conservative and being in the media. Jennifer, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be on your show because, number one, the only time I ever have an opportunity to even talk about politics and journalism and the media is when I'm actually at work as a media analyst. Nobody else wants to talk about this stuff with me, so I'm super excited. A little bit about my background. I've been in the communication field for over 30 years now. For 18 years, I taught communication and public speaking as a professor in higher education. I've held various positions, from community relations. I started out as a journalist and went on to community relations and became a communication specialist for a school system at one point. I was in public affairs, in the Marine Corps. That's where I started, my journey within the communication field. And fast forward so many years later, along with a lot of other people during COVID, some things changed in my position at the school. And so I found myself having to make some tough choices. So I decided, hey, I'm going to start a business. And so I started my own communication consulting firm. So what I do now is I go into organizations and I help them manage their most difficult communication challenges by working directly with the workforce with communication skills training. In addition to that, though, I like to call it my side hustle, is I'm a media analyst. And that's really what my true love is. I get paid to read the news and rate it for reliability and bias. So how awesome is that? I can't believe
let's talk later.
Yeah, that's like the most awesome job in the world, to be honest with you.
Yeah, all right, good deal. First of all, thank you for your service. I heard that you had been in the military, didn't know what branch, and you just mentioned you're one of the elite, the Marines, the few, the proud.
You're former Marine. You're never an ex-Marine. You're a former Marine.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, when I first joined, I remember this was in 1991, and they had just transitioned from the tagline used to be, "We're looking for a few good men." And then when I joined, I remember the little business card my recruiter handed me. It said, "We're looking for a few good men, ... and women." And now I guess they have, they have changed it once again, and now it's the few and the proud. So it's just interesting seeing the transition of language, over time.
So, hey, I guess I'll start off with speaking of the media and journalism. I majored in journalism and know about that list of what it takes to build a story, what they consider to be news. And that's one thing or one problem. And another part of it is just how biased media is now. And I know a part of that, a reason for that, is so many channels. And then the echo chamber and the peanut gallery, and people are giving their opinions. That's the world we live in. So many channels, so many shows where people can talk about, be very far to the left or the right. And sometimes, or most of the time, lie, it seems, and get away with it. But to kind of narrow this down, my first question is really, in your opinion, who are the most non-biased news reporters today?
I will address this question first by saying it's absolutely impossible to get rid of bias in the news. Human beings are writing these stories, and as you know, coming from a journalism background, we're depending on these human beings to make decisions on not only what should be covered, but how it should be covered and what angle and which quotes to use. I mean, there are a million decisions to make. So it's impossible to get all of the bias out of the news. However, one of the things that I have noticed in being a media analyst, the most reliable sources, I will say, the top two that I've seen repeatedly as reliable sources would be AP, Associated Press, and Reuters. Anytime anybody asks me, who should I be reading? I always recommend AP and Reuters, simply for the fact because they tend to be consistently reliable in the reporting. That doesn't mean that there's not any bias in there ever. Mainstream media, even AP and Reuters, they do tend to lean to the left a little bit more. I think the reliability aspect is more important than the bias aspect of it. So that's what I.
Yes, and I agree with that. And conservatives are biased. I guess I mean with news reporters who are supposed to be like the first responders of information, telling the country about the facts of what's going on. What about are there any individuals, to me, like an example of somebody who they can report the news, and I can't tell whether they like or dislike a person or a party. An example of that to me is Brett Baier.
Yes. Yeah.
On Fox, and just like how it used to be with Peter Jennings and Ted Koppel and Frank Reynolds and Dan Rather. You couldn't tell when they went in the voting booth what they were going to do. So I guess that's more specific. But any reporters on CNN, Fox, or any other network that you see kind of in that lane, that sweet spot?
I would agree with you with Brett Baier. He does seem to be consistently. He tries to be consistently reliable, and we all know that he does tend to lean to the right. But in most of his reporting, I agree. I think he does strive to be at least as fair as possible. To be honest with you, with CNN, it's kind of difficult because CNN is almost like the mirror image of Fox. So for me as a conservative, I will admit that my own bias gets in the way.
Sure.
And so I tend to, when I'm reading through these stories, I tend to notice more the reporters who get my emotions riled up more so than the reporters who don't. And I think that's an indication of my own bias. So when I go through CNN, for example, I'll listen to something from Rachel Maddow, and I'll immediately know, where it's headed. So
yeah, we have a name for her on this show. I call her Rachel Mad Cow. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, it's like her brain has been ravaged.
Yeah. But I'm going to be honest with you. I cannot, off of the top of my head, and this is probably a sad statement. I can't think of anybody on the top of my head from CNN that I would say, yeah, absolutely, 100%. I would follow this person.
Okay.
I guess for the regular news consumer, just for the regular people, and you're educating them about bias and that sort of thing, what should they look for as they're reading just a regular article, for example? Are there certain words, are there certain things or themes that they should look for that aren't there? Kind of, how would someone know that it's a biased news piece?
Yeah. Well, there are several factors as a media analyst, what we look for. And previously when I had mentioned the reliability, that's one of the things we look at. We look at reliability, and then we look at bias. So from a bias standpoint, we look at the language that is used. We compare it to if there is a story that's being covered, how is this story being covered in comparison to other sources? The narrative, is there an angle that's being covered in this particular story that is not being covered elsewhere? The sources that are also being used. If there is a little link within the story itself, we click on the link, and where is that going to in order to kind of substantiate the story that's being told? And so that gives you a picture, and you have to also understand in the umbrella of politics, we have this spectrum, left to right spectrum. So understanding the terms that are being used by both sides and whether those terms are being used as disparaging terms, what kind of language is being used on the right versus what type of language is being used on the left, the graphics on the web page, the advertisements, all of those things are going to impact how biased, we consider the website itself. And then there's a whole host of other things, we look at as far as reliability. You have to understand that there is a difference between a news story and explaining what the story is versus analyzing that story versus having an opinion now about that story. And is your opinion well informed, or is your opinion, are you just drawing conclusions without even offering any type of evidence to back up that claim?
And what would you say to readers and viewers, because obviously it's not just online, it's also TV. What would you say to them where they really trusted, and I'll use CNN as an example, they really trusted CNN, and it's hard for them to pull away from that because at one point in time, CNN was very reliable, down the middle, really good reporting, and now not so much. So what would you say to someone who's finding it hard to pull away from a place like a CNN and go to, like you said, the mirror image of a Fox, just to get the balance that should have been in that one place?
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with taking in a good variety of news sources. If anything, that's only going to make you more well-versed, within whatever is happening in the world today. So if you want to watch CNN, if you want to read CNN online, that's perfectly fine. Whatever you want to watch, whatever you want to read, that's perfectly fine, as long as you're going into it understanding what it is that you're looking at. So again, just going back to being honest about how reliable is this, and how do I know what I think I know about this topic? And if this source, if all I'm doing is going to all of these left-leaning sources, then I need to be willing to go over and find some more of the right-leaning sources so that I can see how that topic's being covered by those sources in order to have a more well-rounded understanding. So I would say if you want to hold on to CNN, hold on to CNN, but then maybe add something, a little bit to the right to the diet so that you can have some perspective. I think this is really, really important because so much of mainstream does lean to the left, that anybody who is serious about thinking critically about the information that they're consuming, they really need to be willing to actively seek out those right-leaning sources. It's really easy, to sit back and say, oh, well, I'm comfortable with this. I watch this show all the time. They're confirming everything that I already think anyway. It's a really lazy way to be. So I would encourage anybody, just actively seek out, some of those other sources so that you will actually be more well informed. And don't be afraid to have some of your ideas challenged. I mean, that's how we strengthen what we believe in, right? That there shouldn't be any issue. If somebody says something you don't agree with, that's perfectly fine. That's, I always say, if you don't agree with what how we rate certain news articles, great. Read it yourself. Think critically about it. Ask yourself why. Would you rate it as reliable or not, and bias or not? And then just be able to explain it. We invite those kinds of conversations. So yeah, don't be afraid of it.
Absolutely.
One thing that we talk about from time to time is there's a huge problem in the media with some news sources, some channels lying by omission. Is the number one way they seem to be lying, which is leaving things out. That is obstructing the truth. And I think that the way that they're able to get away with that is because they can't be sued. Unless in an extreme situation, they can't be sued for what they didn't say or for what they left out. And then you can say things that are totally a matter of opinion, like this person is great and uplifting or the best. They are the best. What is the best? That's relative,
Right.
but that's not a fact of thing. So leaving out information. Just one example. This was on, what was that, Inger, MSNBC, where Trump was meeting the children in that room in the White House, and the one girl was in the wheelchair. And I think it was MSNBC, and they said that he didn't acknowledge her at all. Well, when you look at the whole video, they cut that part out because when he walked in the room, she was the first one that he spoke to and ended up actually having a longer conversation with her than anyone else.
Yeah.
And they knew that. It's not like MSNBC, they got to the party late and they rushed in there with their cameras and set up after he was talking to the handicapped girl.
Anything that's going to be covered on Trump is going to have to, it's going to have to be negative. That's just kind of the name of the game in journalism, right? At least with the media. One of the things that I think is even more concerning, that I think is contributing to this problem, Pew Research did a study over the summer. They released a study, and they had found out that among mainstream journalists today, the majority of them don't feel that it's necessary to cover a story equally from both sides.
Wow.
Meaning they think it's okay to cover a story from one angle, solely from one angle, rather than providing a complete picture. So if you want to interview a Democratic congressman about these issues, great, have at it. There's no need to have any comment, from the other side. I think that is problematic. If we have an entire generation of journalists now, and the vast majority of these journalists also that believe that, even more so, are going to be the younger journalists, than the older journalists. So if you have this new generation of journalists who believe, no, it's perfectly fine if I cover this story and I only get half of it. Why should I cover the whole thing? Like, to me, it's kind of like the example that you gave. Someone could legitimize in their mind why that right there is okay to cover that story in that way. Well, we're going to cut this off and we're going to cover this story in this way. That is a huge problem.
Yeah, it's a matter of truth seekers and critical thinkers. Because of how we pursue, we find good sources. We'll find both sides, or I want to get the whole story. I really want to get the. Don't I need to see all the pieces in the puzzle before I can even make a decision or have an opinion about it? I may have an opinion which leads me in the wrong direction because I don't have all of the information, which is not good. That's deception.
And interestingly, when they broke down those statistics, journalists who worked for sources that had a larger population or a larger audience that tended to lean to the left, they felt that this was okay, to only look at it from one side. But the journalists that worked for organizations who their audience was primarily conservative, they did not feel that way. The majority of them actually disagreed with that and said, no, this needs to be covered. We need to cover it more completely, which I found to be very interesting because right-leaning sources get so much heat, from a lot of people regarding the validity or the reliability of those sources.
Yeah,
exactly. And I guess not to switch gears, but kind of. What are your thoughts about the, I guess, the dearth of news stories out there? For example, we'll see a news story about Trump and it's replicated across ABC, NBC, all the Vox, all of those. But if I'm looking for a story about Africa, for example, or a story about, what's going on in Italy, that is a lot more difficult to find in our media. So kind of what are your thoughts about that, what's being reported in our media?
Yeah. You're right. International news, it's very difficult to find. And I'm so glad you asked that question, because that's going to remind me that question you asked earlier about who you would trust. Christiana Amanpour, she has a great she covers international for CNN, and she actually has a very good show. So it's difficult, and you're right. And I think there's actually two things that are occurring at the same time. I think it's difficult to find international stories that are well written and well covered, but also local stories. That is becoming more difficult to find quality local stories. If you want to know what's happening locally, with your school board, with your congressman, any decisions that are being made, it is so incredibly difficult to find local news organizations that have the resources, the manpower, the money to be able to have, really good local news coverage. And so it's the opposite, the two ends there that I think are struggling. And I think it's a shame, because what it's doing for the readers or for the audience is we're forgetting there's a whole other world out there. There's a whole world, right?
Exactly.
It's not all about Washington, D.C. There's so many things that are happening in the world around us, and we're completely ignorant to what's happening.
Let me talk about a few things, that are going on now. So I heard last week about Venezuela. They said they have close to 100% inflation.
Mm-hmm.
We've never seen that here, but what that sounds like to me is that the price of everything is pretty much doubling. It's doubling often. Okay. You being a conservative, I'm assuming that you're a capitalist. They kind of go hand in hand, and communism and socialism is the enemy of capitalism. What can people learn? What can Americans learn from what's going on in Venezuela, and the direction that we don't want to go in? Because nobody, political opinions are going to push to the side, part like the Red Sea, when you got 100% inflation.
Right. Yeah. It's common sense, isn't it? I don't understand why this is even a topic that is debated at all. I mean, if you just look at history, you can see, look, capitalism, is it perfect? No, but it's how we have been able to thrive as a country. It's how we have been able to accomplish what we have accomplished as a country. So when you look at situations like what's happening in Venezuela, I guess from a conservative standpoint, it's like, well, duh, yeah, of course, that is what's happening. And then when you look at our inflation, what's happening now, based on the decisions that have been made over the past couple of years, you see where it's headed. You can read the writing on the wall. So as a conservative, I feel for the people of Venezuela, because I can't even imagine what it would be like to live under a regime where you have absolutely no path to move forward. If you're super left leaning, and you love going and getting your soy lattes, at Starbucks, guess what Starbucks is thriving off of? Capitalism, right? That's why it's doing so well. And we're just getting a little tiny taste of, look at our inflation and look at how horrible it is for us right now.
Right. And you have these folks, these leftists complaining about capitalism at Starbucks on their Apple iPhone using Facebook,
Yes.
as they get into their EV to go to work from home or work someplace. It's like, what do they miss?
Tell me again how bad you have it.
Right.
People on the
honestly,
left.
let's look at Venezuela. Let's look at North Korea. Let's look at all of these places. And now tell me how bad we have it. Yes. And that's, to your point earlier, asking about international news. That's why I think it's such a shame that we don't have more international news that's covered more readily. It's more readily available. Exactly. Because people's understanding of what's happening in the world, it's completely skewed. They have absolutely no idea what's happening.
They don't. And I'm in communications, not to the extent that you are, but I know when I was going through grad school and we talked about it, that it seems like it's more expensive now to get the news. When I was growing up, I remember that we would even have local reporters go out and do an investigative story, not in Georgia where we are, but maybe somewhere across the country or even around the world. They would do an investigative story. Now we don't get that. And is it because it's more expensive to do that now, or kind of for the local newsrooms, or even for some of the national newsrooms? What's the driver of that? Not even doing investigations anymore.
It's a very difficult problem because, it all boils down to money, right? And a lot of the local news organizations, they just do not have the capital that these larger news organizations have. And so what you're finding is they have less and less manpower, so they'll rely on one journalist to be able to go out and scrape together however many local stories that they can. A lot of times they might just rely on letters to the editor, to have, I guess, volunteers. And then the other side of that coin is, advertising. Of course, a big issue in journalism today. We have so many of these sites anymore that are just made for advertising sites. And so what you have is they're just making millions and millions of dollars off of these, corporations who just want to get in front of a large audience. And so they're not going to spend their money on these smaller, organizations, local news organizations, because they're just not going to get the clicks that they're going to get in the, on the larger websites. So it's a very difficult problem. And that's one of the things we're actually trying to address in the organization that I work for as media analysts. We're really trying to impact the news ecosystem in a way where advertisers are cognizant of where they're putting their advertising dollars as far as reliable news. And that's why we spend a lot of time actually highlighting local news organizations as well.
I want to talk about our illustrious President Biden. We have 6 or 7 different creative nicknames for JoJo Dancer, Bitey Boy, and the Democrats. They seem to have their theme being, we are a savior. We are a utopian party. You can have heaven on earth if you put us in here. And, Biden became consistent with that. A couple things that he said, he's going to bring everyone together, like either only Jesus Christ or the Antichrist can do. Bring everyone together, the Arabs and the Jews, everybody. He's going to bring everyone together. He said he's going to end racism. I appreciate he doesn't.
Worked out.
He doesn't have any tasks that are too lofty a goal.
Right.
All right. But then he says things that presidents have never said. where he clearly has a lot of brain fog going on. Every week, there's at least a couple gaffes that we can mention. And he just recently said this. He said that his little sister used to be 3 years younger than me. Now she's 23 years younger than me. This was a Facebook post just put up in the last couple of days. Right. And then below that, it said, apparently, Biden's little sister doesn't age. You know.
Translation, please.
And then this other quote from him, he said, there's not a single solitary Biden man that is younger than any Biden woman. So,
right. Yeah. And
Joe,
then what happens?
You're not younger than your mother?
Yeah, yeah. And then a handler comes out and says, well, what he meant was, what he meant to say was, what he really said was, yeah. So I guess we're waiting for the explanation.
That woman whose name he called when he was having the meeting saying, hey, are you here? Now we know,
the one who had passed away. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now we know the invisible person that he's been turning to, trying to shake their hand, who isn't standing there.
Right. Yeah.
Or maybe it's several people. I don't know. I didn't like him when he was Obama's wingman. You know, I don't like things that he said and stood for, but he's a different guy now. And there's clearly just a lot going on with the challenge of putting together sentences and just saying so much incoherent stuff.
In the directions when he's reading his script, you know, at the end when he reads the script, and he even reads the instructions at the end.
Yes.
Repeat now. And they need to add in their exit stage left, and so he can read it out loud, and he can say exit stage left, and then he'll know.
First, they have to put in parentheses before that. Do not say this out loud.
But he'll probably read that. Do not say this out loud.
Yeah.
You know, one of my biggest issues with politicians like Biden is they're really good at telling you what they think you want to hear. And so one of my biggest pet peeves is, look, if you are expecting a politician to make your life better, you are going to be sorely disappointed your whole life. Like, you're just going to be sadly disappointed, because there is no politician in this world who is going to be able to fix anything for you. You know, your life is not going to get better based off of, you know, voting for Biden. So no matter what promises are made, at the end of the day, and this is one of the things that makes me a conservative, is that I wholeheartedly believe that we have choices to make. Every day we wake up and we have choices that we have to make. And whatever circumstances we find ourselves in, we still have choices. And so I need to think, am I going to make a choice right now that I'm going to be okay with tomorrow? Or is this going to be a choice that tomorrow I'm going to be mad at myself? I just don't get how, so-and-so says that they're going to, you know, make things okay for me. Like, do you really believe that? Like, really?
Yeah, and this is my personal opinion, is that some of the language from them is almost like they're trying to replace God. Look to me, or look to the government for some of the things that you should look to God for. People that don't have God in their lives, I think they're more susceptible to that, because human beings were created to worship. And if we don't worship God, we're going to end up worshiping politicians, athletes, singers, actors.
Yeah, because there's a hole.
Kardashians.
There's a hole. And, you know, when you have that hole and you're searching it for it to be filled, you know, with something, you're searching for external sources that will help you find some type of meaning in this world. You know, what type of purpose do I have in this world? I was talking to my son earlier, you know, we were having a similar conversation. And, you know, I said, one of the issues with people who, you know, we were talking about outrage culture. And I think one of the problems is with this outrage culture is a lot of individuals feel like in order to feel like they are doing something, in order to feel like I have
Yes.
purpose, I'm going to get mad at this for you. It doesn't matter if you think it's a big deal or not. I'm going to be angry for you. So let me handle, you sit back, I will handle this. And I think it's a similar mindset. I think when you have this hole, whatever it is that you need to, you feel like you need to fill it with something. And I think that's what's happening. The outrage culture, I'm going to be, offended by everything for you, even if you're not offended by it.
Yeah, I mean, someone's life can be fine and everything going well, and they can become mad by something that a political party shows them or the media shows them, and just change their attitude. And some people, they don't have anything going on or don't have much going on, and they want a bandwagon to jump on. They want a team where everyone's wearing the same colors or uniform, something that they can be a part of.
Right. Right.
And hatred and anger is a blinding, wild emotion where it clouds your judgment and stops you from thinking straight.
Yeah.
So I think that's what they want. They want people to be upset. And one other thing that I want to mention that I saw also in the last couple of days, this was a Facebook ad. Everybody knows there's an election coming up, the midterms. So a Facebook ad on my page got this girl walking, talking about, honestly, the only thing that I remember is her saying that racist cops shoot black people or gun black people down every day. That is such a lie. Such a lie.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Every day racist cops gun down black people. This is a lie that they know is a lie, and they don't want to be uncovered. I want to throw out, for people that don't already know, there's an organization called the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. And they not only have crime included in that, but a breakdown. There's about 10 to 15 black people, unarmed black people, that are killed by police every year. 10 to 15.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. There's 365 days in a year. So that's such a big lie. It's not only not every day, it's not every other day, it's not every other week for that to be true. And also, and this isn't just looking at the glass half full, if there's 10 to 15 people, then we know that there's at least 30 states in the union where there's no black people that get killed by police every year. There are none. Or, an entire 1 year period will go by without a state having an unarmed black people, because hopefully we can all agree, the left included, that if someone is waving a gun at the police, they deserve to be shot at.
Yeah, that's not a
to
smart
defend
choice. Yeah, that's not. I have a cousin who died in the same way. Was fighting with his girlfriend, and I come from a background where it was full of violence and alcoholism and drug abuse, and I witnessed my first stabbing when I was like 5 years old. Okay, so
Wow.
my family, growing up, I know what it's like to live in these situations where you don't feel very safe, as a child growing up. But my cousin, he did the same thing. My mom calls me up. She's crying, cousin Doug got killed by the police. I'm like, well, what happened? And they got into a fight. The police were called, and apparently he raised his shotgun at the police, and they won. I mean, and I told you, but they didn't have to kill him. And I'm like, well, I mean, they didn't know. They have families to go home to. They don't know what he's pointing a gun at them. What do you expect? What do you think's going to happen? So, I know what it's like to have a family member who is killed by the police, in a situation like that. And I can tell you 100% that was my cousin's fault.
Right.
He made a bad decision. He should not have done that. Yeah.
And then even if a gun is not involved,
Yeah.
do not resist arrest.
Yes.
There's so many things, and I try to tell people, I try to tell men, what are you teaching your son? How do you want your son to behave if he gets pulled over by the police?
Right.
And I'll go this far. First, let me say what I teach them. You get stopped by the police, be respectful. Don't curse at them. Don't raise your voice at them. Don't spit at them. Don't try to run. Don't try to wrestle. Yes, sir. No, sir. Anything you say, Mr. Officer, and to comply with them. If they do any of that, they deserve what they get. Honestly, the adrenaline is pumping through the ceiling, and these police officers never seen this person before in their life. They don't know what their intentions are. As far as what someone would teach their sons, you're making it look like I didn't do a good job raising you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Because let's assume that people's behavior is what they learned in the home, including when they get stopped by the police,
Well, and that's a big
and how
Southern
they
thing too, right? Yeah. See, I'm from Georgia as well, and so that's a big Southern.
okay,
Do not leave this house and embarrass me.
right, right,
Exactly.
right.
not leave
And
this house.
to piggyback on what Elmo was saying, they're taking a story, a statistic where 15 people a year, 15 black men or whatever a year, are shot by cops. And the media is blowing that up out of proportion. So now you have people reacting to it because now that's all that they see in the media. So
Right.
it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, destructive circle kind of thing. And they think that's going on when actuality it really isn't. And it seems like I can't remember who said it, but he said a lie gets around the world before the truth can get its pants on. And that instance is
Mark
just like
Twain.
that. It's just, how do you catch up with something like that? How do you can't unring that bell once it's out. So how do you kind of handle and control that?
It's really interesting, though, when you see the number one issue that everybody is concerned about right now is what? The economy, right?
Yeah.
That's the number one issue. It's really interesting how that is the number one issue. That's what the American people are concerned about, and that's what they want to have conversations about. They want to know, what is it that we're going to do about this problem we have with our economy?
Yeah.
Yet you can see that there are still certain websites, certain news sources that just absolutely insist on continuing to try to make race the number one issue. Race is the number one issue, and nobody is saying no, it's not.
You're right.
But it is what gets clicks, right? It is what it's something easy, that emotion contagion, that whatever it is that they're looking for.
Yeah. And do you ever see the pendulum swinging back the other way, where people will start to demand, I need to see more stories, or I need to see more information, or the other side of this particular issue? Do you think the pendulum will swing back the other way?
I'm hoping so. It does seem that, just the temperature in society today, it does seem like many more people like myself are becoming more vocal with what's happening in the country. There were a lot of silent conservatives over the past few years because, even just working as a professor, at a university, you don't see very many conservatives walking around campus, talking out loud about what they think about certain issues, because then you're going to get shouted down. You're going to be called, a million names. But I think there are a lot of people like myself who are beginning to see, look, we got to start speaking out about this stuff. And so I think that silent majority, with the conservatives, I do see that is beginning to swing the other way. We are becoming more vocal. And I think a lot of people are becoming less afraid of being called names. I think the name calling is so played out. It's like, okay, you want to call me that name, but it's not true. And I'm whatever, it's kind of like lost its ability, with that. So I do think it is beginning to swing, but it's going to be very, very difficult because social media, for example, like with that what you were just talking about a minute ago with Facebook
Yeah.
and stats, did they label that as false information?
Did they?
No.
No? Yeah, see,
But
that's
if it was conservative on YouTube or Facebook, then they may have been banned or
yeah,
yeah.
you're right. And so I think society wise,
Mhm.
I do feel that the pendulum is swinging, but I think we have a lot of resistance with social media, with the news media. I think it's going to be very, very difficult, just based off of even what I read every day as a news analyst. It's challenging. I get into, I don't want to use the word argument,
You're
but
right.
we get into robust discussions every day because we work in groups and we read the same articles and we rate them individually, and we have to have conversations on where we're going to place this on the chart. And as you can imagine, depending on the topic,
Mhm.
we'll go. We've got some rounds we've got to do, and it can be very, very challenging having these types of conversations with some of the left lean analysts because
Sure.
they are operating off of what they read, which is going to be.
I know you have a book. You have a book that you've written and another book that's coming out. Can you tell us more about those?
Yeah, the first book I wrote, it was back in 2017, and it's called the Mini-handbook for Jackasses. It's on communication and relationships. And so I found myself, I was very frustrated. People were conservatives, speakers were being shouted down, and so I wrote a little bit about the First Amendment, and the idea of respect, and you have to be willing to listen. If you want to support the First Amendment, you have to be willing to listen to ideas that are different, beliefs and values that are different from your own. I talked about the whole idea that the internet is this invisibility cloak. So just because you are on Instagram or Twitter, it doesn't mean that you should immediately, become a troll and I just start spouting off things and hiding behind that. So that's what Mini-handbook for Jackasses was all about. It was just kind of like me being fed up about some things. And recently, actually, it was just published. I'm actually a co-author in a book that's called Cracking the Rich Code.
Okay.
And it's a collection of authors who come from a variety of different backgrounds. And in my chapter, I talked about self-empowerment. I shared my story of joining the Marine Corps and how difficult that was, because at the time, my recruiter had never put a woman in the Marine Corps, and he really wasn't about to start with me. And nobody supported my decision, not one person. Everybody thought I'd gone insane. And so I just, in that chapter, I just talk about that journey and how challenging that was, and just some of the things that I learned about myself, in order to just keep going and do the thing that you think you truly want to do, despite the fact that there are those obstacles in the way.
Do you have any, I guess, final thoughts for us or about what you do and what we've discussed and that sort of thing? Any tips or anything that you want to, any final thoughts you want to leave with them?
Yeah. I guess to get on my high horse just a little bit, I wholeheartedly believe that we all have an ethical responsibility to what we are putting out in the world and how we are taking in information. I had mentioned critical thinking skills. We have an ethical responsibility to make sure that whatever it is that we are reading, we're looking at it logically. We are thinking about not only what is being covered, but how it's being covered. I think we have an ethical responsibility to our society to not be afraid to allow others to voice their opinions. I think that is really happening to conservatives at an alarming rate, and it's very disturbing, to me, and not just on college campuses. And I think if you are a conservative, I think it's time that we start speaking out more often. I know it's been very disconcerting to have opinions about certain things and to be shouted down and to be called names. But I think it's about time we need to just come together and start being more vocal about the things that we know are important, because people like myself, I'm part of the problem. I've kind of stayed silent for too long.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Thank you very much, Jennifer. You have a multifaceted talent and experience that's very valuable. All right, very cool, very cool. Everybody that's listening, watching, subscribe on YouTube if you have not already. You can also catch us on Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Everybody take care, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
And thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank you for having me.